All right, thanks for tuning in. We're going to have a podcast discussion right now with Gerald from the Labor Action Committee to free Mumia Abu-Jamal. Gerald, we're going to go over some history right now, but can you clarify for us what the purpose of this podcast is right now? Because this is an important moment that we're in.
Right. Recently, Mumia Abu-Jamal has been granted new rights to appeal his former conviction. And thus, we really want to emphasize that this is a unique moment in which, for the first time in 37 years, there has been a positive decision on his case, and it opens up the possibility of Mumia leaving prison and proving his innocence.
Great. So that's the really important moment that we're in. So we're going to need to go through a little bit of history to get clarity on that, both as a refresher for folks who have been involved in the campaign to free Mumia for a while, but also for those of us who maybe don't know the whole backstory, have heard his name, or maybe have never heard of Mumia.
That's right.
But all of that is in the service of getting to this really important moment that we're in, and emphasizing what we can do to lean into this moment and figure out what we can do to help take advantage of it.
That's right.
All right, let's dig in.
Okay. Mumia Abu-Jamal is one of the best known political prisoners in America. He was framed up and sentenced to the death penalty wrongfully for the death of Daniel Faulkner, a police officer in Philadelphia. And that was 1983. He has been in prison now for 37 years. In the 90s, we had a movement called Millions for Mumia, and this literally led to Mumia's case becoming a household word in America, Mumia's name being a household word. Mumia actually joined the Black Panther Party in Philadelphia when he was 15 years old. He was the Minister of Information. Now, that, of course, drew the attention of some of the authorities. So he actually drew the wrath of Frank Rizzo, the racist mayor of Philadelphia, for consistently uncovering and reporting on the cases of police brutality. This is after he was no longer a Panther. He became a journalist. The situation and the confrontation with the Rizzo regime rose to its highest point when, on August the 8th of 1978, Mayor Frank Rizzo ordered the police to evict the Move. The Move commune had they lived on Powelton in a single dwelling, in a large dwelling. And the police showed up to evacuate or to evict them. Now listen to this. We're talking about a situation where there were 600 police mobilized to evict a group of maybe 20 people. Here is what happened. The police surrounded the dwelling. Now anybody, I think a 6-year-old child would understand that you never form a circular firing squad if you're going to do a military action. Well, they surrounded this Powelton commune of Move, and somebody claimed that they heard a shot. Well, if they did, it was because of the police, because it was later on found out that the weapons that Move did have were all inoperative. They began shooting, an orgy of firing at the dwelling. And through that activity, the police shot they shot 6 policemen, they shot 3 firemen, and 1 policeman died from his wounds.
So the police shot themselves in the process of trying to evict a radical black organization from
That
their
is
housing.
correct.
And this is in Philadelphia, just to be clear. And this is in 1978?
Yes, it is. So immediately, just hours after this raid, they had a press conference, And remember now, some of this was on television. The beating of Delbert Africa when he was surrendering was actually on television. They showed how the police were stomping him and pulling him by his hair after he had his hands up. And remember, the MOVE commune people never fired a single shot at the police because the weapons that were found were all inoperative. Okay. So at City Hall, Rizzo was blunt with the press. He expected them to close ranks in support of the police actions. Then, from the crowded pack of reporters, a young black journalist spoke out in the resonant tones of a radio broadcaster. He raised pointed questions about the official policy, the police story that Rizzo had just shared with the press. Mayor Rizzo exploded in fury because this young reporter, Mumia Abu-Jamal, had pointed out the stupidity of the police raid itself. And what Rizzo, what he said was a thinly veiled threat, and I have to quote this. He said, "They believe what you write and what you say." They being the people of Philadelphia. And it's got to stop. And one day, and I hope it's in my career, that you're going to have to be held accountable and responsible for what you do. This was a very thinly veiled threat against Mumia.
Gerald, can you give a little bit more background before we move forward about what was Mumia like as a journalist? Why was he? It seems like this wasn't the first time he covered some important Black liberation struggle news. So can you say a little more about that?
Sure. Mumia had won the deserved moniker of the voice of the voiceless, and the reason he was described in that way is because he had the habit. He said, "Look, you told me in your school when I went to study to be a journalist that we should always show both sides of the argument." So he would bring in members of the community who were complaining about police brutality, and then he would invite the police to come and share their point of view. He invited MOVE to come in and talk about some of their conflicts with the police, and he would invite the police to come in and explain their point of view. Well, the police never showed up to defend their racist practices. So through this process, he was given the name the voice of the voiceless.
And this all kind of came to a head when he continued his practice in calling out the mayor after the attack on MOVE.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So in 1981, Mumia was falsely accused of murdering Philadelphia police officer Daniel Faulkner. In 1982, a corrupt, racist judge named Cebu framed Mumia and basically sentenced him to death. From the day Mumia Abu-Jamal was arrested, the Fraternal Order of Police, a kind of, I don't know what you call it, it's a political organization for police.
Some people have described it almost like a union, but it's more than that, right? It's like a very politicized body that advocates directly on behalf of the cops.
In fact, it's not. Most police are not in the Fraternal Order of the Police, but it does propaganda. It organizes campaigns. Whereas, for instance, let's say the police in our area of the country are usually in something called the Policemen's Benevolent Associations, which negotiate their economic contracts. Now, it's true that these so-called unions, and I want to challenge and say that police are not workers, and therefore they can't have unions, okay?
Right.
And in fact, they need to be expelled from all mass labor organizations. But they do have organization. And I tell you what, in a society where the population is not well organized, when you're organized, you get to impose your point of view more, completely. Okay, so from that day when Mumia was arrested, the Fraternal Order of Police and the state in general did all they could to silence this outstanding militant. Mumia was excluded from the courtroom by Judge Sabo during his trial. Now, I want to say this. Mumia Abu-Jamal wanted to defend himself, in part because he had just seen John Africa successfully defend himself and defeat the federal government in a weapons trial.
That is, he wanted to be his own lawyer?
Yes, he did. Well, he saw John Africa do it successfully. Mumia is a highly intelligent man, so he figured, But what he didn't realize was how committed they were to framing him up. Lesson, always have legal advice. Even if you want to speak for yourself, have some legal advice prepared and ready to work with you when they pull something illegal that you may not be aware of, so you can have some defense procedurally, not just the case. It is very difficult for a working person to know all of the procedures and the laws that operate in a courtroom. They actually excluded Mumia from the courtroom while he was defending himself. And I'll tell you why. He was interviewing the jury. So he was going to, participate in selecting the jury. And all the reports I've read is that Mumia was doing an excellent job. And Sabo just didn't want him to continue. So he excluded him. Period. End of it.
And that's just one of many of the systematic ways in which they've denied him any type of due process or justice.
That is correct. Mumia not only was excluded from the courtroom during his trial, but this same Judge Sabo oinked in the presence of Terry Moore Carter, the court stenographer. This is a case where they were in the back of the court having lunch, and another judge, he were comparing their dockets, what trials they were coming up.
Right.
Terry Moore Carter was sitting at the table with them, and he said, "Oh yeah, I got this case, and we're gonna help them fry the nigger." This is the judge of the case, y'all. Okay.
This is sick.
The ultimate censorship, silencing a man in court who is fighting for his life. And that's what Sabo did. Now,
well, this was silencing, but at some point this came out that the judge said that, right?
Well, okay. Now, how that came out, since you asked, is Terry Moore Carter, I think, was wise to realize how the people she was dealing with were extremely corrupt. So what she did was she retired. And when she retired, she had her checks coming to her, all that's closed. Then she came to Mumia's defense team and said, "Look, this happened." When we got that information, I was a volunteer. I simply, helped to proofread the statements that the lawyers prepared for court. Long statements, sometimes 600-page statements. Mm-hmm. But that was just on a volunteer basis. So I was keenly aware of what was coming up, what was going on. And I tell you the truth, y'all, I assumed that if this goes into court, there's no way they can hold Mumia any longer. That this was going to go through and the Mumia was eventually going to be released, because how can you have a judge referring to a defendant as a nigger in any court? How wrong I was. Enter Ronald Castile. Ronald Castile was the assistant DA when Mumia was being tried, and then he became the DA, the district attorney in Philadelphia. And he fought the early phases of Mumia's appeals. So it's clear this guy had some, quote, what they say, skin in the game, right? I should just let you know, Sabo committed 32 violations of Mumia's constitutional rights during the grossly unfair trial that Mumia went through and was eventually convicted and given the death penalty.
32.
32. I don't want to go into each one. Look,
right.
For instance, it is a constitutional violation to remove someone from the courtroom without providing them with a television and a piece of paper and a pencil so they can deal with problems of the trial as they unfold. You don't just put somebody in the hole while they're on trial. So, I mean, that's just one of the many, many violations committed by Cebu. But now we're moving on to Ronald Castile. Now, his role as both prosecutor and judge in Mumia's case was challenged. So this came up as a result of a prisoner who the same judge, Castile, framed up as a DA, framed up this, Mr. Williams claims that he was framed up. So he went to what's called a PCRA, Post-Conviction Relief Appeal. And he shows up in court and he looks up, and the judge now is the same man, Ronald Castile, who was the district attorney when he was framed up.
And just to be clear, this Williams case is a separate case from Mumia's, but it's going to become really relevant to the opening that's happening right now.
That's right.
And kind of the occasion for why we're even talking about this.
That's right.
This particular moment right now. So say a little bit more about this. This Williams case is really important to understand. There's a lot of details here, but get to the heart of this story with Williams versus Pennsylvania.
Okay, the heart of the Williams decision, which went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided that Williams was right, that you cannot be the DA and later on be the judge in the appeal of the same case. When we saw this, we immediately filed, because this is exactly what happened in Mumia's case with this guy, Ronald Castile. Okay? So to make it a long story short, excuse me, in the light of the Williams decision, it opened the door to a court decision vacating, that is, overturning and dismissing all of Philadelphia Supreme Court's denials of Mumia's post-conviction petitions or appeals. Very important, because Ronald D. Castile had become the Chief Justice of the Philadelphia, of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court.
So this can't be overstated. So this is actually a ruling in favor of Mumia for the first time in
37 years.
And what does it mean for the previous rulings against him to be, they've been overturned at this point? Or what does this mean?
They have been reopened, and basically what is going to happen is if Mumia, all right, yes, Mumia now reappeals, it's going to become very clear that the very judge that sent us the documentation saying petition denied, two-word petition denied, normally a normal judge writes why the petition was denied. This cat was raw.
Wow.
He just said petition denied, and everyone knew that something was wrong, but there's a kind of a conviviality amongst these so-called judges where you don't criticize a fellow justice.
Right.
And the injustice flows.
Wow. Okay, so this is very significant.
All right, so skeptics might say, all right, well, what if those Supreme Court dudes just won't do right? Well, they did. And here's the point. It opens up. It doesn't guarantee anything. Only the struggle can guarantee Mumia's freedom. And that is why we need people to pay attention to this and to organize around it and to educate their fellow students, the church members, their fellow workers. We need the unions.
That's right. And so it's clear that there's an opening right now with this, the reopening of some of the appeals that Mumia has put forward. Can you maybe go into now what are some of the history of organizing efforts that have been done to support Mumia and to fight for his own release that have happened throughout the years? Because I think that hearing about that will remind people who are involved, as well as educate those of us who are maybe, weren't as active then, and hopefully give us a light forward for what we can do in this particular moment.
Okay, well, to be honest, we don't expect people like Ronald Castile to, quote, do right on their own accord. What we do expect is for our listening audience to take action for justice. May I remind you that in 1995, Pennsylvania Governor Tom Ridge signed the death warrant to execute Mumia. At this time, there was a social explosion. And to be honest, the power of the working people stayed the hand of the executioner. Very important to understand. It was the action of millions that turned that situation around.
Students, workers.
Right. And in fact, in 1999, here in the Bay Area, the longshoremen led the way. We won. The longshoremen themselves had a one-day strike up and down the coast. That is, no cargo moved on that day under the rubric of Free Mumia. We also had a march that same day in San Francisco that 25,000 people participated in. Later on, the next year, the teachers for Mumia in the city of Oakland led anti-death penalty and Free Mumia Day, where the entire day students discussed the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal and what is wrong with the death penalty. The entire day. This is the power that we do have and that we must exercise. So a little bit more, though, on recently. Mumia fell ill. He got very sick from hepatitis C. Actually, he collapsed in prison. And his comrades actually said, "Nah, man, this is wrong. This is wrong." And they demanded that he get some kind of medical treatment. When we found out about it, to be honest, I didn't understand how serious it was. But you always listen. Listen to your comrades. Listen to your co-workers and your friends, because you can change. We all change as a result of the struggle. So I began to understand how serious this was, and we began to organize in defense of Mumia to just keep him alive.
And this was just a couple of years ago, 2016 or so?
That's correct. We started off, why doesn't he just take the medicine? It winds up that there's a medicine called Harvoni, which is a pill for hepatitis C. Mumia had hepatitis C. That's why he was so sick. It winds up that a pharmaceutical corporation called Gilead Sciences, located here in Foster City, not too far from you.
Right.
They bought the patent for this. They didn't develop it, but they bought it's theirs. So what did they do? They charged 100 times what the cost of the pill is to produce, so that the pills were $1,000 a piece, so that it would cost you roughly between $80,000 and $100,000 to be cured from hepatitis C. We said, no, that's crazy. So we organized.
And we, as the Labor Action Committee and other allied organizations doing Mumia solidarity work.
That is correct. So not just, all right, we spread this out. We said we want Mumia to get treated for hepatitis C, but this is a general problem in our society. So we are for public health, not corporate wealth. In fact, that was the slogan that we adopted. And we didn't just organize people that support Mumia. We organized nurses. We got the nurses union involved. We organized with clinics that dealt with people with liver problems, because they understood what hepatitis C was, hepatitis C. So we organized people who had the need for the drug, plus health professionals, and we put together a little movement, of people that understood that this was outrageous, that anybody would charge $1,000 per pill, like that. The opportunistic, it's just. So we went to, our first demonstration was at the Hotel St. Francis in Union Square, where they were having a corporate meeting basically, I call it a flea market for all of the pharmaceutical companies and people who want to invest in those companies. And we had a picket line outside. We were chanting, had a spirited demonstration. And one of the lessons here is it pays to demonstrate sometimes, because in so doing, by demonstrating, we attracted the media, and somebody wrote up the story, and bam, now it was in the bourgeois media, the corporate media, and I'm actually shocked that the reporters didn't understand what was going on. We had to teach them, but we did. And as a result, this information got around, our coalition got stronger. We eventually had a demonstration in front of Gilead Sciences in Foster City. We had about 3 or 4 forums on this matter. We raised money and we sent it to Mumia's lawyers. A brief was filed. They sued the state of Pennsylvania, and Mumia sued not only on his own behalf, but on behalf of all of the prisoners, and won. If you are in the custody and control of the state, they have a responsibility to see that you get the appropriate medicine. So Mumia won the case and was given the Hep C medication, Harvoni, and is today Hep C free.
I mean, this is an important victory. It's not a total victory, but this is a really important
We kept him alive.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this is the work of activists who've been committed to this for a while, continuing through the ups and downs, but seeing this really important moment.
That's right.
Having your own discussions and debates about the way forward, and then taking an action locally here in the Bay Area in order to raise awareness, but also just to call attention to what was happening to this comrade who's locked up.
And look, remember, now he was alive, and then the next thing you know, same year, we get the Williams decision.
Wow.
See? And then we file, and unfortunately they take forever. But last year, December of 2018, Judge Tucker decides for Mumia.
Okay, so these are some really key events that have happened that led to this opening we have now. So now that there's this opening, we've talked a little bit about the history of the organizing, the teachers for Mumia, the longshoremen who shut down the port across the West Coast. Right. There's been other messages of solidarity on the part of unions, and
by the way, may I say this?
Please.
That all along the way that we have supported Mumia, the Labor Action Committee has supported Mumia, we never confined our efforts simply to the United States. We always saw Freedom for Mumia as being an international case. So we took this information to England and to South Africa, and formed an alliance with the Metal Workers Union, NUMSA, and I think the name of the union in England is Unite, is a union federation in England. So we have constantly worked with unions from other countries in getting out the information about Mumia Abu-Jamal.
That's really important international work that you are doing. There's also a statement that was written recently this month, January of 2019, by Keith Brown, the president of the Oakland Teachers Union, the OEA, Oakland Education Association. And I wonder if it might be useful to read it to kind of get a sense of what the call is right now, because there's a specific demand right now on District Attorney Krasner in Philadelphia, right? Do you want to read that? Or?
Sure. Dear District Attorney Krasner, teachers and educators call on you to do the right thing. Do not stand in the way of justice for Mumia Abu-Jamal. Do not appeal Judge Tucker's decision. As a progressive attorney, you ran for Philadelphia District Attorney on a platform that included standing for justice, not just for convictions. I mean, not just for convictions, but also, you were you said you were opposed. He said he was opposed, for instance, to. He said he was opposed to the
prison industrial complex,
etc. That's what Keith is referring to here. You promoted reviewing past convictions and freeing the wrongfully convicted.
Right.
In Philadelphia, Abu-Jamal's frame-up stands out as the city's most notorious wrongful conviction. I urge you to allow Mumia Abu-Jamal to go forward with re-arguing his appeals, which Judge Tucker states would best serve the appearance of justice. Sincerely, Keith D. Brown, President of the Oakland Education Association. So this is, Keith wrote this, by the way, on January 1st of this year.
Great. Yeah. Shout out to Keith and the OEA for that. So given that that's the demand on District Attorney Krasner right now, what are the upcoming steps that people need to both pay attention to, but also, talk to our coworkers, our fellow students and neighbors about right now?
Okay. As I may have stated before, I've been involved in supporting Mumia Abu-Jamal since 1987. And, I've worked with a lot of people on this matter. So the number one thing we need to make sure is that people that have known about the case do not think that it's over. There's been so much on this case, it takes on the status of a saga to some extent, but that's not useful when people think that, okay, it's wrong what they've done, but they got him and there's nothing we can do about it. Well, this Tucker's decision means that there is indeed an opening. This is real, and this is now. So we need to very patiently and intelligently rebuild and reignite the movement to free Mumia, because we have a chance now to see that brother walk outside of those prison walls.
All right. So before we maybe wrap it up, what are some ways in which we can follow up on that call that you just put out there? Is there an email address, or is there a phone number, a website for organizations that people who are listening might want to connect with can use to contact us?
Well, yes. I generally don't want to direct people to the internet, but because I prefer direct communication. But right now, if you go to the Labor Action Committee's website, all of this information is available. So I think it's called the LAC.
It's laboractionmumia.org. So people can Google Labor Action Committee to Free Mumia Abu-Jamal. And the website is www.laboractionmumia.org.
Thank you very much. And that is definitely one way to tune into the facts. But we don't only want you to be well informed. That's good. We want you to be well informed. But we also, oh, by the way, there's a program called Redacted that is on YouTube, and I think it was on Russia Today or something, that actually invited one of the former attorneys of Mumia, Rachel Walkerstein, to explain his case. So this is something that you can dial into, and if you go to our website, it's on our website.
Yeah, it's the top post there, and this is resources that people can use to host mini forums in their whether it's your apartment complex or your school or your university or your workplace, wherever you're at, you can gather a few people together, friends, colleagues, whatever, and discuss this and figure out ways that we can systematically pay attention to this and be ready to mobilize people to apply the appropriate pressure.
That's correct. And by the way, one always starts off small. Regathering our forces is something that we have to do systematically, step by step. I recommend that people involved in the Black student unions that have an interest in politics in our community and the nation get involved. People, they're Dylan Ruth recently, a Nazi, a neo-Nazi, they call him. A Nazi's a Nazi to me, walked into a church and murdered 9 people. That church was called the African Methodist Episcopal, right? That church since has been very active in anti-racist politics in the United States. You have to use your imagination and your creativity to reach out to people like that who are open to ideas and positive activities. So I have held, for instance, a conference on police brutality at the African Methodist Episcopal. So, you know what I mean? So, I can't tell you exactly what to do. You have to look at what are your opportunities? Who do you know?
Right.
So if you're a student, try to bring it to your school. If you worship every week, find out a lot of churches have justice committees and things like that. And just talk to people and see if they're interested in taking this forward. But for sure, your workplace, your union, more and more our unions are starting to understand that they cannot simply be a place that collects dues. The Janus decision forced many trade union, business unionists to reconsider that and understand that unions can and should play a positive role in the struggle for social justice.
All right, so these are some really clear ideas and that we can use to sort of guide our way forward in figuring out how to fight for Mumia's release. So thanks a lot, Gerald, for coming in, and then we'll have more information as it comes out.
Thank you very much, brother.